for joining us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have plenty on our plate today, so let's get started with a look at the day's highlights. Korea's finance minister says he will do all he can to keep local markets stable in light of the shocking election outcome over in the U.S. How much of an impact will Donald Trump's presidential win have on the Korean economy? We'll sit down with an expert to delve in further. Just one day after a surprise Donald Trump victory in the U.S. presidential race roiled global markets, Korean shares have snapped back. On this Thursday, Seoul's benchmark Kospi was back on the other side of the psychologically important 2,000 mark, while the Kosdaq closed up nearly 4%, recovering its losses from Wednesday. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won weakened against the greenback to 1,151 to the dollar. Foreigners were net buyers, snatching up more than $150 million in stocks, while individual investors were net sellers. And a recovery rally was seen throughout other Asian bourses in step with Wall Street's lead. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the Nasdaq had all closed up over 1% on Wednesday. And that momentum crossed to Japan's Nikkei, which ended up the day up 6.7%, which was more than enough to recoup Wednesday's deep losses. Hong Kong's Hang Seng also recovered, up more than 2% in late trading. European stocks, which had fallen as much as 3% at one point in trading, closed higher. Indices in the UK, Germany, and France all added 1% or more. But Korea's financial authorities are still bracing for potential turbulence following the U.S. presidential election. Now, while Trump's victory might add more uncertainties in the financial market in the short term, local authorities aren't too pessimistic. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Korea's finance minister says the government will act swiftly to stabilize local markets amid the rising uncertainties surrounding the new U.S. president-elect. Speaking at a ministerial meeting on Thursday morning, Finance Minister I화여자대학교 said the possibility of a shift in U.S. economic policy has only added to the uncertainties in the global financial market and the real economy, already burdened by the Brexit and the slowdown of the Chinese economy.
The government will come up with effective countermeasures after analyzing Trump's campaign pledges and their impact on our trade and export fronts.
He added that the government will keep an eye on any changes that could impact Korea through its various channels in Washington to maintain relations that benefit both sides. He also said that if necessary, the financial authorities in Korea will act immediately to stabilize the market. But on a brighter note, Yu said that some of Trump's campaign pledges, like one to boost the manufacturing sector, could end up benefiting the Korean economy. Echoing that optimism, Korea's top central banker Lee said the markets have reflected expectations that Trump's protectionist stance could result in more growth-friendly policies for economies, although his unexpected victory has intensified uncertainties in the short term. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
Korea's central bank is widely expected to keep its key rates steady at its monthly monetary policy meeting on Friday. In a recent survey of 100 local market experts, 99% said they believe the Bank of Korea will freeze its rate at the current 1.25%. This as the BOK will want to gauge what impact Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. election will have on the global economy, as well as to see what move the Fed Reserve will make at its December rate-setting meeting. The U.S. Federal Reserve has signaled that a rate hike could be in the works next month, and while most analysts agree that the Fed will maintain its stance, it could put its plans on hold until next year, should Trump's victory trigger market volatility and uncertainty. Over in the country's construction and housing market, the Korean government is also taking a closer look at the implications the U.S. election will have. Speaking at an emergency meeting on Thursday, the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, Kang Ho-in, said the results may add further downward pressure on the country's housing market due to greater uncertainties. But he said it could also provide more opportunities to clinch more overseas construction orders, as Trump had pledged to spend billions of dollars to rebuild America's infrastructure. The minister added that the government will work to create more favorable conditions in line with the changes and draw up countermeasures based on the president-elect's economic pledges. Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election yesterday was enough to keep Koreans on their toes, while markets were rattled amid growing uncertainties. And now eyes are on how Trump's win will affect the Korean economy that is already struggling with falling exports and low growth. Take a look.
We have a great economic plan. We will double our growth and have the strongest economy anywhere in the world.
This is what Donald Trump, elected the 45th president of the United States, said during his acceptance speech. But as Trump plans to make America the strongest economy in the world, other countries around the world are getting worried that their economies and growth may be sacrificed in the process. Before the election, investors had heavily expected Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton to win, explaining the plunge seen in the global stock market as votes were being counted. But investors snapped up U.S. stocks overnight as they embraced Trump's election win and started betting that his plans may help bolster economic activity. Asian shares also shot up with traders weighing in potential policies under a new U.S. president. So what lies ahead as Trump gears up to lead the U.S., and how should Korea prepare for what's to come?
And to tell us more about this, Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
All right, so first tell us about the plunge that we saw in Asian shares yesterday upon the news of Trump's surprise victory, as well as what impact this had on financial markets as well.
Well, there were huge drops in Asian financial market, particularly stock market, because Mr. Trump's victory was not at all expected by the market. And increasing uncertainties on U.S. policies further increases uncertainties or ups and downs of the stock markets.
All right, well, but then after dropping sharply, global stock markets regained ground after Trump's victory speech. So how can we explain this?
Well, the rebounds of the stock market is natural phenomena after a huge drop of the yesterday. Actually, Mr. Trump didn't say much about the details of his policy. So market instability will be continued for a while until Mr. Trump decides what to do exactly.
And some more details come out.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's look at Trump's economic election pledges then. It seems that he will lean more towards trade protectionist measures. And no doubt this is going to affect the trade relationship between Korea and the U.S. And it can't be good news for Korean exporters who are already struggling.
Well, actually, the active and more aggressive protective policy has been started several years ago by Obama administration. For example, U.S. government enlisted Korea as a currency manipulator. And also, POSCO was imposed by 40% of the tariffs on U.S. export. But the problem is that that policy, protective trade policy, will be intensified under Mr. Trump. And I think that auto industry and steel industry will be the most affected by this new policy.
Now, then what about the Korea-U.S. free trade agreement? I mean, will we see this revised or even scrapped altogether?
Well, actually, according to the details of the FTA, both parties can terminate the FTA free agreement with 6 months in advance notifications. But technically speaking, it is extremely difficult for restarting the negotiations because U.S. government has to manage the interest of conflicts between U.S. companies. That is extremely difficult because U.S. economy and Korean economy is highly intertwined these days.
So you see more of a revision coming then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That is a possible scenario.
Okay.
There will be more pressure from U.S. government to revise FTA's details.
All right. Well, there are also concerns that the Korean economy will be negatively affected by a potential trade war between China and the U.S. Do you agree with that?
Right. It is true that the number one target of U.S. aggressive trade policy is China. Mr. Trump even said that he will impose 45% of the tariffs on Chinese products in the future. But the problem is we have huge indirect export to United States through China. For example, if China export furniture to United States, we export machines that produce furniture to China.
So we're going to be affected just as much.
Exactly. That's going to be additional concern on U.S. policy.
All right, now going back to Trump's acceptance speech yesterday, he said that he will double the country's economic growth, making America the greatest economy in the world. But at the same time, he did say, get along with all other nations. So at this point, how do you see Trump going about implementing his plans to protect the American economy?
Well, I think that Mr. Trump is partially acknowledging the importance of the free trade. If we take a look at the history of the U.S. economy, U.S. Prosperity is deeply rooted in free trade. For example, U.S. economy's foreign dependency has been increased by 5 times for the last 50 years, up to 21%. And for example, 40% of the U.S. trade is covered by multinational, U.S. multinationals and their subsidiary companies all over the world. For example, Nike, which is multinational U.S. companies, imports their shoes for Vietnam.
Okay. All right, now others are also saying that with Trump's win, Korea may have to pay more for U.S. troops that are stationed here in Korea, weighing down on the Korean economy as a whole. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, of course, there will be stronger pressure on increasing Korea's share of expenses on U.S. military. As of now, Korean government is spending over $800 million per year for U.S. military. That covers about 50% of U.S. personnel expenses.
Okay.
But there will be additional pressure to increase that burden of the share.
Then you think it's going to affect the Korean economy as a whole?
Exactly. Actually, the size of the Korean military expense is about the 39 trillion won. So if U.S. pressures to increase their expense on U.S. military, that's going to be another pressure up to 1 trillion Korean won.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, what about the U.S. rate hike that's expected to come next month, as well as what kind of impact will Trump's win have on the European economy, especially in light of Brexit?
Well, actually, Mr. Trump has been pretty much critical on Janet Yellen, who is the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, because she wants to increase the interest rate by the end of the year. But Federal Reserve interest hikes can have a negative impacts on Brexit and European economy, because European economies will be increasing their rates simultaneously. So that's going to be a negative impact on European economies.
Well, I guess it's best for us to prepare for what's to come, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Independence for young people used to follow the steps of getting a job, saving up money, and moving out. But these days, a lot of young Koreans are finding this virtually impossible, leaving them financially dependent on their parents. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
As more young Koreans struggle to find quality jobs, many are finding it harder to leave their parents' nest, even after they finish their education and are old enough to move out. According to Statistics Korea and Korea Employment Information Service, the number of people between the ages 15 to 29 who were unemployed for more than 6 months has increased to over 80,000 as of August, nearly doubling from the same time last year. In fact, this age group took up roughly 44% of the total long-term unemployed, driving up overall numbers. With limited means to financially support themselves, they are left with no choice but to remain dependent on their parents. A survey by Korea Labor Institute on over 5,600 young Koreans indicates more than half, or 53.2%, rely on their parents to pay for living expenses. About 27% said they support themselves, while 6.5% depend on their spouses. The institute adds the majority of those who support their own needs usually have no choice but to do so due to their parents' low income. Experts say the lack of quality jobs is the root cause, with wages often falling far short of housing costs and daily expenses, making it harder for young Koreans to stand on their own 2 feet. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.